Yes.
And what was now, maybe what certainly the new president here, Obama, who we all are very happy with so far, that the response to it is to use that lightning bolt to now move forward very rapidly onto a fertile ground. And so there's a teaching in that image, as is found in all the tarot cards, that there is a lesson, both a positive and negative aspect that we can learn from.
Interesting. And would you say that those people who didn't, in that regard, then get out in time, symbolically speaking here, weren't able to pass through this time or this?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. This rite of passage, and I in my deck I see that with the 9 it sets the major arcana into a matrix of 3 rows of 9, and that there's a line. There's 9 lines. That's the 9 paths, and each of those triads of those 3 cards that form a line, I call a rite of passage. And if you look at the logic and the meta teaching in these lines, you'll see that what is revealed in this deck is really clear rites of passage through these difficult challenges. Now, with the tarot, if your card comes in reversed, as I'm sure people who have read tarot cards know that they can come in upside down.
Yes.
That usually carries more the shadow aspect. Now, when we're talking about the Tower card, as you're saying that, it reminds me of there's a wonderful tarot author and teacher, Rachel Pollack, who you may know. She's quite well known. But she made an interesting comment about the Tower card when it's reversed. And what that points to, she says, is being stuck in the dungeon below the tower. And and I think that that's a really great metaphor, because I think that that's where a lot of the the stuck places in response to the tower are. They're in the tower reversed. They're underneath the tower, and all this rapid upheaval is occurring, and the response to it is occurring. But there are some people that have tunneled down underneath in the dungeon below the tower and are living underground in this very trapped and stuck place where they're like shackled beneath the tower. And that's is a brilliant symbol for a mind state, a condition that I think operates on some parts of society, that with a tarot card and one who can talk about it in this way, it's a mirror that you can begin to locate what's happening not only in your own personal psyche, but what's happening in your whole community. It's like our community is stuck in the dungeon beneath the tower. So that's how these images, these visual images and archetypes can be useful.
Could it be that has been a choice for some people as well? They're kind of huddled in fear under the tower, and this gives them a kind of a false sense of security, maybe?
Absolutely. And so, and that brings up the interesting point, is that the ultimate solution with tarot, as I see it, is awareness. And it's not necessarily that we identify with the good gods or the positives and we avoid the bad.
Sure.
It's more that we, in a way, we become aware of the whole archetype, positive and negative, and that we, in a way, distance ourselves or separate from it through awareness, where we can see that is the underlying structure of our conditioned world, maybe on its purest level. And there's also now a choice where there's the unconditioned. That's what I talked about earlier, where, that whole thing is constructed. Even on the archetypal level, it's a constructed reality. And the choice is that actually we don't have to go to either side of the tower, really. We can see it and learn from it, but we can choose to actually come into fresh, immediate, present-centered awareness now, apart from this huge psychological energy that's operating in our field.
Yes. Well, I know that you talked about this in the DVD, The Great Work. Something I really resonated with, this idea that what we perceive to be negative or a bad thing or an event or whatever, that actually necessarily don't have to be a negative or bad thing. This could also be a sign of opportunity for change, or rather something that we should in one way kind of embrace instead of avoid or running away from it, right?
Well, I agree, and I think it's tempting, and even in our respective fields, where people that kind of listen to this show and are interested in these sorts of so-called alternative ideas, etc., there is, I think, a danger and a fascination to get really invested in the shadow side, and to look at doomsday stuff, and to look at to get the 2012 end times kind of fantasies, and to actually make put a lot of energy behind them, and also get into the self-fulfilling prophecy dimension of that.
Yes.
And so that's something that we need to watch out for.
Well, exactly. It's a very good point. I think it's could it also be that people and are fascinated by these things because they on some level they do actually need to experience the shadow, in that sense, that they've been avoiding it for such a long time. So when it finally hits them, when they come into alternative research and material, there's almost a craving or a wanting for the apocalypse, if you know what I mean, in a symbolic term again, or an individual term, the apocalypse, their own personal apocalypse, that they want to live through this, because that is actually the catalyst that makes them do the changes that is necessary to move on. What do you think?
That's a very good insight, and I think that that's true. There's, I think probably Freud talked about that as the death wish.
Yes.
And it does, in a way, become inviting. It does, in a way, become fascinating. There's a part of the psyche that says, okay, well, let's go with it. Let's just blow it all up. And if there's something that is kind of appealing in this irrational way, and almost addictive, to just get into this dark. It kind of drives a lot of the types of movies that we tend to go watch and see. There's a fascination with the shadow.
Yes.
It's a saying in like old American westerns, when all of a sudden the guy with the black hat rode into town, all the ladies in the bar got very, very stimulated. They all came rushing out to look at the bad man who's coming to town.
Yes.
And there's something just very, stimulating, it's almost erotic about, going into this intensity of the shadow. But I do believe that can be a real trap as well.
It could be, and I guess well, how would you say, is it important then up to a certain point, meaning that you need to identify the shadow, or what the dark side of yourself is, if you know what I mean, in that regard, but not get trapped by the allure by it. But you need to awaken that the shadow in yourself, but you also need to work with it or overcome it, I guess.
Well, yes, but I think that there's a potential problem of calling it a thing and turning it into a something that you have to get rid of, or that you have to explore, and that kind of thinking is really lends itself to all kinds of dualistic, polarizing thoughts of the good part and the bad part.
Sure.
And the problem is not the content there, but it's the process of thinking in those types of polarities and dualities that I think ultimately is the cause of the content.
Hmm.
And rather than coming from a more non-dualistic place.
Right, right. And what do you think people need to do to get over that, or to stop thinking in the dualistic terms or sense of things?
Well, I think that you begin to, you start to realize that one, language reveals a lot. It really, and it's not something that you want to get over, quote, get over, because there's nothing really there.
Hmm.
It's a construction of mind and nothing more. And so rather than getting over it, it's more just being, or just being aware of what's going on, and noticing things that you may call dark or shadow, and things that you may call healthy and positive, but not giving them a lot of solidity as because they're existing in a very dualistic way. So it's kind of like mindfulness, like the Buddhist mindfulness, where you approach what's happening in an open-ended way. You note your thoughts about it, your conditioning of it, but you don't follow it. You don't go into them very far. You just let them be there and dissolve, and you try to hold it in the present moment without adding on to it. That's awareness, and I think that is really the solution.
How about integration from the Jungian point of view then? Is that a similar way of dealing with it, or is that still giving credence to it, or giving it energy, or verifying it? What do you think?
Well, that's a paradox, isn't it?
It is.
And so it's working with integration, and inclusive of that paradoxical quality of integration, where on this non-dual perspective, there's really nothing to integrate. So I think that you have to be careful about getting too literal with these terms, and that the more you can presence what's underneath these distinctions that we're making, like, the healthy and the unhealthy, and more that you can get underneath those words and those ideas to presence a basic level of being or awareness, where you see those are just relative concepts that don't really matter as they're used.
Yes.
That's what the unconditioned is about.
And in one sense also, I mean, this is what the signals, if you will, that the world is giving us all the time. Hot, cold, white, black. You have summer, winter. You have death, life.
No, it moves product. It sells. It's in a basic consumerist economy and worldview, I'm afraid. This kind of polarization basically creates the illusion of need, and it's good for business, I guess. But
yeah.
Unfortunately, people buy into the illusion, and they take it literally, and they start believing that there is something there, that it's real, when it's not. It's conditioned. It's kind of self-created. These distinctions that we make.
Really? So even in terms of what we can see in the world, both on a symbolic way or nature, if we look at it from the point of view of nature, I certainly see that there is a duality in nature, that how things, the interaction down from the from the subatomic level up to the macrocosm level. In that sense, I see that there's a duality in creation. But do you think that that's but yet at the same time, this is the paradox, as you said before, I see that it's all part of the same thing, right?
I would ask you to where that duality lies, where it exists.
It exists in me, of course, because I'm observing it.
Right. But does it exist from its own side, or is it just from your side?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Is the reality objective, or is it subjective?